So the next session is a panel discussion, and I think I'll invite Jaime to come up and he'll chair this next session for everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, Alistair, for the welcome to stage, and shout out to Victorians First People Assembly doing some fantastic work on advancing the treaty negotiations here in the state of Victoria. Let me pay my respects to the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people, traditional owners and custodians of the land that we meet on today. Pay my respects to both their elders past and present, and of course their ancestors that have paved the way. I'd also like to shout out to my people, the Djapurrungu and the Jamara people, for allowing me to be here today, and of course to all First Nations people that have made their way in the journey down to NAM to participate in these conversations. Well, good to see everyone sticking around on a Tuesday afternoon. I'm sure you're kind of getting itchy feet to get out of the building. But an incredibly important conversation, and particularly on the back of Ash's presentation. I think in some ways you could call it where the rubber hits the road, with the financiers and other, I guess, corporate entities trying to work with First Nations groups to advance the economic self-determination and rights of our people. Today we welcome the NAB team to stage to talk about what they're doing to do that in particular, and they'll have the chance to present on what they're doing in NAB Group, but also more broadly within community as well to advance the causes that Ash has touched on some of them, but you'll hear throughout today. Indigenous business ownership is championed for supporting economic development and participation for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Despite comprising of approximately 3% of Australia's population, and also controlling over 16% of land, Indigenous Australians own fewer than 1% of the businesses. Access to financial capital is increasingly being identified as a barrier to successful business growth. First Nations communities and people continue a proud history of entrepreneurship and innovation in responding to the global economic and trade opportunities. Many First Nations people and communities are continuing to fight for self-determination and economic development rights in their country and are forming businesses and community organisations to advance the common agenda. Feedback from First Nations people engaged in working across Australia highlights an ongoing sense of frustration with government, industry and financiers who seem to lack the understanding on how these businesses and organisations operate and how their priorities can differ from non-Indigenous organisations. In this session, NAB Indigenous Business banking specialists detail the process of building a banking relationship approach from a strength-based perspective, discussing whether Indigenous businesses' finances need to differ materially from non-Indigenous businesses, and considering the impact on place and how we service the needs of Indigenous businesses and community customers. So I'm going to throw it over to the panel and they'll be able to introduce themselves today. We've got the team and they'll run through their certain presentations, and then we'll get a great opportunity for about 20 minutes or so to be able to ask questions to the team that they can take back within their business and hopefully deliver better services for our mob. So I'd like to welcome Noel to stage, and you can kick it off, brother. Or do you want to sit down there, or do you want to come up here? Okay, sure, thanks.
Thank you, Jaime. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of this country, past, present and emerging, and thank them for sharing their country with us this week. I'd also like to acknowledge all our First Nations brothers and sisters who are here with us this afternoon. I know it's late in the afternoon, as Jaime mentioned, but I'm glad to see so many people here. My name's Noel Prakash. I'm a Fijian man with Indian and Indigenous connections. I've worked for over a decade in Indigenous business banking. I serve on multiple boards of Indigenous not-for-profits, and in my day job, I'm the National Head of Indigenous Business and Community Banking at NAB. What I wanted to do today was cover a little bit around about NAB and what we're doing in this space, as Jaime touched on. And then I just wanted to share a little bit more before we throw it to the panel around what we are seeing in the market as the change probably for the last 2.5 years. We'll kick off with NAB. NAB's a private relationship bank that has been around for around 170 years. And we acknowledge that we need to do a lot more to be able to better bank our First Nations business communities. Our leaders know firsthand the importance of supporting First Nations communities with tailored services. Our CEO, who used to lead our Indigenous business banking, now is at the helm of this. His experience extends to some Canadian heritage. He ran Bank of Melbourne for decades, and he brings with him a lot of the understanding of how we get this right, around the pathways and the importance of over 20 years of investment in relationships. I think that's the foundation of our approach for the last 2.5 years, and we're just starting this journey. Over 2 years ago, we stood up our national team of state-based First Nations specialists to work with our First Nations business and community organisations, from startups all the way through to emerging corporates. Late last year, you got ahead, we announced a $1 billion commitment for this sector by the end of 2026, and we're working hard to get to that. This commitment allows us to be innovative, and it also allows us to form some strategic partnerships to get there. We know it's a tough journey with the challenges that we have, and that commitment was quite strategic to make sure that we are pushed to be able to innovate in this space and make the change. Only last week we announced our research partnership with ANU, and we will work closely with Professor Peter Yu and his team to help build on the work that he started a few years back around access to the right type of capital for this sector. This is a 3-year project with the outcome to help push the findings as a policy adjustment so the whole of the finance sector can benefit and get behind the change. What we're seeing in the market at the moment, with a constant ask from employees and shareholders, most commercial banks are starting to refocus and innovate in the ways that will support our First Nations sovereignty. The bigger focus around that has been on economic empowerment, better access to financial services, and economic development, community development projects. We're seeing a shift in this space around banks looking to customise financial products. So banks are developing financial products to meet unique needs. This includes specialised lending programs. We're seeing a big shift in the way their saving accounts and their investment options are set up and aligned. And a lot of that products and services that they're creating have both cultural and economic goals attached to it. There's been a bigger focus on partnership and collaboration with Indigenous organisations, corporates and government entities. Commercial banks are creating programs that facilitate economic development with a focus on areas such as home ownership, infrastructure projects, and there has been a big focus now on energy, clean energy projects and the likes. There's a bigger focus on building capacity in financial literacy. The finance sector as a whole are investing in financial literacy programs and capacity building initiatives that includes workshops, training sessions, and educational materials designed to enhance financial knowledge and skills of our community and the business community as a whole. There's been a bigger focus on community investments and social impact initiatives. We're seeing the finance sector increase their investment in community projects that promote social, economic, and environmentally sustainability, like funding for housing, healthcare, education, and I touched on before renewable projects. To better service the First Nations customers, most banks are now implementing cultural awareness training for the staff. This ensures that the employees understand the historical and the cultural context when we're dealing with First Nations communities, so we can provide more respectful and better effective service for the cohort of customers. There's a bigger shift we're noticing in the digital banking solutions. So there's a recognising the importance of accessibility. Banks are moving to create more digital banking solutions to reach remote and underserved communities. I think historically a lot of this service was provided through the branch network. As the dynamics change, I think there's a bigger focus on digital. There's better banking apps, there's other financial tools, remote counselling service and advisory services that are partnering with to be able to make sure we reach these services to where it's needed the most. We're seeing a larger focus, and I talked about the work we're doing with ANU around policy and advocacy support. Financial organisations are focusing on advocating for policy changes that will support First Nations sovereignty and economic self-determination. This is in forms of research, lobbying for improved land rights, resource management and financial regulations. There's a deeper focus now we're seeing, and we heard Adam Lees and Dr. Jenkins talk about it before, around free and prior consent, FBIG, around intellectual property management, and the bigger part of this is data, Indigenous data sovereignty. And the thinking behind that is that the data should sit with the people that own it, and not governments and banks. We hope that by integrating these innovative approaches, commercial banks are starting to play a critical role in supporting First Nations sovereignty, and hopefully contributing to longer-term economic and social well-being of our First Nations communities. I'll hand over to Fletcher now to talk about some of the work that our team's doing, and also some of the work that he's doing in the New South Wales and ACT space. Thank you.
Thanks, Noel. I'm using a lapel mic, so don't worry if I'm not holding it up to my face. I'd just like to start by also acknowledging the traditional owners of the country they're on. Nyan Marangku Paran Wiyan Warandri Bonarong Miramalikan Pariani Paringkupa Nyachan Nyan Morong Wiyan Yarankai Paringpai Yokai Kau Pangai Kau Nyachan Kupakau. So my name's Adam Fletcher. I'm a proud green guy Wanneroo man from the Hunter Valley. I wear a whole bunch of hats like a lot of black fellas do. I've been working at NAB for 15 years. I'm a member of the Wanneroo community. I actually lived down in Naarm for about 13 years. And I've been interested in politics, economic self-determination, a whole bunch of stuff. And I was asked about sort of 3-4 years ago actually to help shape our Indigenous business strategy and approach, which led to the creation of our team. So we launched our team in 2022, as Noel mentioned, and we decided that place-based specialists are critical to what we do. And so we'll start talking about some of the observations we've got in the different jurisdictions that we serve in. But each state has its own history of colonisation, as we all know. The states take their different approaches, and our own communities have different values and aspirations. So we felt that it was critically important that rather than having a single centralised team that serves the whole country, that we really do invest in creating specialists who work alongside our local bankers so that they understand what our customers are asking for and where they're coming from and what kind of entities they're constructing, whether it's a PBC or a native title org or a trust or a land council or a for-profit business. We just want to make sure that we are equipping our bankers to understand what you guys are trying to do and the different value systems you hold. It might not necessarily be the pursuit at profit as the first objective. We recognise the challenges in our sector or in our industry in banking. So Banking's a pretty structured business. We sort of start off with small businesses registering themselves, and there's an expectation of self-service when you're smaller. And as your business grows and your lending complexity increases, that's when banks typically will start serving you more directly with a dedicated banker who's going to sit down with you and understand the risks and opportunities your business is facing. But that transition can be painful, and often it's the fortitude of the customer to navigate that segmentation process that helps get them through. And for our team, what we wanted to focus on is making sure that we're available to all of our customers, regardless of size, so that we can help them navigate that process, so that there's always a point of continuity locally that you can talk to. If you have an issue, you still have your local banker. It's still their relationship with you that's prime, but we're there to support you and them as well as they go through that journey. And we're also looking to explore partnerships with other capital providers. So Ash's presentation was great, talking about how there's different ways to think about value. Organisations like philanthropists, there's First Australians Capital, there's Indigenous Business Australia. There are different organisations that are trying to understand how our values work and are looking to fund those investments on those terms. And there's a complementary role that banks can play from a debt perspective, and we're making sure that we're understanding those opportunities and partnering with our customers early on. We also know that relationships aren't always rosy. So if we're banking you from the beginning of your business entity to the end, there's going to be moments of hardship and struggle, and we want to make sure that we're here to support you as best as we can. And we have customers who go through insolvency and challenges like that, and we want to make sure that our customers are clear on those processes, they're aware of the risks before they enter in processes like that, and that they've got the supports around them to make sure that they can make it through that process as best as possible. We also provide letters of support for our customers to sort of support their business, so explaining the relationship we have of those customers. And we're a sounding board as customers are looking to grow. So they might talk about strategic growth opportunities they're pursuing. We'll work with them to understand those and help them understand what role credit might play alongside other forms of capital. In terms of what I've been looking at into my role, so I moved from Victoria. I still cover this territory, and although we're hoping to appoint a local banker soon who will be a specialist for Victoria and Tasmania. But I currently look after New South Wales and ACT as well as Victoria and Tas. And so I moved home to country about 2 years ago. And in New South Wales, native title corporations are less common to have secured native title, so progressing all the way through to native title determinations compared to some of the other jurisdictions. In New South Wales, we've got a land council system that's been operating for about 40 years under the Aboriginal Land Rights Act. I think there's 124 local Aboriginal land councils divided into 8 regions. Land councils are quite innovative in terms of having an investment fund that funds their work. So it's called a statutory investment fund. It has a corpus or a sum of money that's invested. It's about $700 million. You know, the aspiration is to have it grow. But that funding is what funds that whole network. And there's strengths in the sense that that fund isn't reliant on government for top-ups, but it's also a limited amount of funds. So they've got to be very prudent about how they divide that money up. As a consequence, when you look at the land councils across New South Wales, there's almost no direct New South Wales government funding on a recurrent basis. And that makes funding, core teams, operational staff incredibly challenging. So when you see land councils, often they've got a CEO and maybe an administration assistant, and they've got a really onerous legislative role they have to play, and they have an important community engagement role as well. So they're incredibly challenging roles to play, but there is opportunities for growth, and some of our land councils are innovating, starting up local enterprises and doing things like that. In terms of business development, so New South Wales was one of the early adopters of both the Indigenous procurement policy and they developed an Aboriginal participation plan. And that's led to a rapid growth of Indigenous business ownership. And that's particularly focused in construction services, corporate services and professional service firms. But you're seeing a whole wave of new Indigenous entrepreneurs coming through. And then most recently, in terms of policy, there's been 3 treaty commissioners are currently being recruited. So just like Victoria, there's an exploration of what treaty might look like for the state of New South Wales. So that potentially will have long-standing ramifications for Indigenous people across New South Wales going into the future. In Victoria, you've got native title running alongside registered Aboriginal parties, and Jamie would know a lot more about this space than I would know, but you've got a number of successful native title determinations. You've got RAPs covering about 75% of the state of Victoria. There's a treaty process underway. We've got the First Peoples Assembly, the Truth-Telling Commission, as well as a long, proud history of Aboriginal community-controlled organisations providing health, legal, social and so many other services to the community. And there's also been a number of business ownership strategies. Tharamba Bageen and Yuma Yurumboy have been growing. So there was a target initially of 1% of Victoria's small and medium business procurement to be going to First Nations business by 2020. And the new strategy is aiming to build on that aspiration too. In Tasmania, there's mainly a 1995 Aboriginal Land Rights Act that created the Aboriginal Land Council of Tasmania, and they operate in a similar fashion where they're receiving land back from state governments through application, and they're looking for collaborative land management practices. I'll hand over to Charlene now to have a bit of a yarn about what's going on in Queensland. And then Noel's going to round us out, just covering off on our colleague Annie, who's actually tied up in Perth. Hopefully will be joining us in person tomorrow, covering off on what's happening in WA. But thank you.
Thanks, Fletch. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge traditional owners and pay respect to the Wiradjuri people where we meet today. I'd also like to acknowledge all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today as well. As a summary for myself, I'm a career banker and more recently have been given the privilege and the honour of leading our business in Queensland. The specialisation was established in Queensland in October 2022, but more nationally for just longer than that. I've been appointed to the role through established connections in regions, through my career experience with industry, and also personal exposure to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture, including South Sea Islander culture in Queensland. I was born and bred in central Queensland, and I continue to be based on Darumbal country. I'm very privileged to be working in the environment where I was raised, but also applying regional knowledge through areas to First Nations business owners. There's quite a strength in doing that from a regional perspective, but also as a specialist who has been a banker in the past. I'd like to just give a quick snapshot of the differences and the population in regards to Queensland. It does differ a little bit from other states, but essentially on a high level we experience and interact with generally the same, I suppose, finance industry challenges across each state. So for a Queensland snapshot, 4.6% of Queensland identify as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, as opposed to generally 3%, which is often talked about across Australia. Of those 4.6%, approximately 80% are First Nations peoples, and 20% are either Torres Strait Islander or a mixture of both First Nations and Torres Strait Islander. Statistically, more than 50% of the 4.6% Indigenous population in Queensland are under the age of 25 years. That's where a lot of the future leaders are coming from. It's also where we try to see the most amount of support, I suppose, in regards to future empowerment and understanding of the industry and how we can learn as well what the younger generation are bringing to the table through their education and opportunities that they're currently seeing. The specialisation in Queensland covers all of Queensland, including the Torres Strait and all coastline islands. Predominantly, NAB customers for density are located in southeast Queensland, North Queensland, far North Queensland, and through the Torres Strait. When it comes to native title, and again, Jamie will know more, and is certainly more of an expert than myself, but statistically, a third of Queensland is recognised as native title, with 91 registered PBCs, 909 ILUAs registered in Queensland since 1999, 213 native title determinations, of which 142 were made for an entire area native title where that exists. Registered native title claims in Queensland have been 39 since 2002. And in regards to applications, which total approximately 700, 76 have been from Cape York area, 238 from northern Queensland, 312 from southern and western Queensland, and 89 from the Torres Strait. In regards to councils, 77 government shire councils exist in Queensland, including 16 Aboriginal shire councils. Infrastructure costs of Aboriginal shire councils have been supported by Department of Housing, Local Government Planning and Public Works through initiatives such as the Indigenous Council's Critical Infrastructure Program. There are also 5 Aboriginal land councils throughout Queensland, 3 on the mainland and 2 in the Torres Strait. What we're seeing in regards to the market and demand for our services, but also adding to our specialisation and the support we offer to our aligned bankers. In regards to green and clean energy, it's definitely increased demand on those services through 4 particular Indigenous-led green and clean energy products that include hydrogen, hydro renewable energy, wind generation and pumped hydro, and carbon abatement. There's also a lot of focus on IPP in regards to government big build projects. So that's through regional hospitals, the Gold Coast Light River Rail heading into the Olympics 2032, the Copper String 2032 project, marine precincts such as Cairns, the Pioneer Burdekin pumped hydro, port access roads and rail, the Rocky Ring Road, Fitzroy to Gladstone pipeline, Torbanley train manufacturing and Aura master plan community. All of those projects are putting significant demand and requests through for Indigenous involvement and cultural collaboration when it comes to tendering and the IPP process. We're also seeing Queensland Defence projects pretty much leading Australia's frontline in Queensland through a 10-year roadmap. And the establishment and continued growth of the defence sector in Queensland has been quite significant. In my area in central Queensland, the Shoalwater Bay project area has been going through a great amount of growth and civil works in the last 18 months. The defence industry has been requiring contractors and SMEs to assist to access defence supply chains, and that comes through our clients approaching banks where they've exhausted other avenues or may be wanting to actually enter into a relationship with a major bank and seeking our assistance through tendering for those projects that have been successful. The defence projects are building capability in land, space, air, maritime and defence circles, and we'd expect that that will continue through that 10-year project. As a part of the specialisation in Queensland, we also do quite a lot of work with the Chambers of Commerce and Industry and Indigenous regional networks. So I work with chambers regularly regarding regional events and activities, including key representatives in the regions of the Indigenous Chambers of Commerce. So they include the South East Queensland Indigenous Chamber of Commerce, Murray Chamber of Commerce and First Nations Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and Indigenous business networks such as Indigenous Business Queensland, Townsville Regional Indigenous Business Network, Cairns Indigenous Business Network, and Queensland Indigenous Business Network. Some of the requests that have led to Indigenous business clients coming in and the industries that we're seeing a lot of growth from particularly are construction and services to construction, manufacturing and mining, education, health and housing, food and beverage and native ingredient products, There's a lot of innovation through government departments and food processing centres in Queensland and regional partnerships. In regards to tourism, we're also seeing a lot of demand and interest with Indigenous business owners seeking funding for funding that supports in-person tourism, but also for the digital tourism options on the back of COVID and travellers' inability to access traditional areas. In regards to Queensland Indigenous business challenges and considerations, there's always the challenge of remoteness in community, including Cape York and the Torres Strait regions and outer islands, opportunities for employment on country and in remote and rural communities. There's always a lack of access to transport, nutrition, health, housing, services and financial literacy. Impact from natural disasters that cause a financial, emotional, physical and sometimes displacement in communities. And lack of a culturally appropriate aged care and housing services in community are often trends as well. We're also seeing quite a lot of requests or discussions and collaboration on joint venture type projects driven by the major infrastructure projects that I mentioned before. And they often require significant investment and capital injection. And as a result of that, a joint venture is often considered as an outcome that can be achieved, but it has to be for the right genuine reasons. In regards to feedback that I received that are the most common challenges for Indigenous business growth in Queensland is increased demand for services that exceeds the ability of the business to onboard people or upskill First Nations employees in the business. Capability of businesses to access funding needs that are appropriate for the contracts that their capabilities match and for contracts and tenders won. And evidence of difficulty accessing like business owners and networking opportunities and mentorship. I'll pass it over now to Noel, who's going to just give a quick summary of Annie, who can't be with us today.
Thank you, Charlene. I hope I'm doing any justice. He's due to get here tonight, so hopefully if some of you guys are around, you'll be able to go around and have a chat with her in a little bit more detail. I'll try and do it justice. Annie's based in WA, the Noongar Whadjuk country, and she supports our Western Australia business, South Australia and NT. Key focus for Annie outside the day-to-day stuff is what I think most of the guys are doing, is a focus around native title and working with our lures. Across WA, SA and NT, up in the North and West region, there's significant opportunities that result from infrastructure projects, minings, and also around the rising, I think, focus on clean energy that's in the region. For SA, where Annie spends a little bit of time, to put that into context, there's an estimated $15.5 billion worth of projects that's coming up that's due to be complete in the next 7 to 8 years. And just in the next 3 years, I think they've got $3.2 billion worth of project that's going to be delivered. So when we're talking about procurement opportunities for Indigenous businesses and the support that we can provide with financing some of those, she's got her hands full in SA. NT, there's similar projects. I think the focus for Annie has been in NT around currently some of the airport programs up in Tenema Expressions. We've got some challenges in the East Arnhem and Nhulunbuy where I think Rio's tenure is coming to an end. So there's going to be a rebuild of the community. So I think we're just walking through the role we play in that around funding some of the new opportunities and businesses that are coming up. In WA, I think there's some couple of major projects around rail infrastructure, and also I think Charlene touched on before, defence opportunities. There's a ton of projects there that reaches out from between WA and far north Queensland. Some of the other bits that Annie's working on is around equity-based projects. So working through in partnership, I think Fletcher touched on before, some work we're doing with IBAs and some of the larger mineral organisations is around how we support businesses that are procuring to some of, for this contracts to be able to provide capital into those businesses, with the focus around tying in the corporates or the government as part of this, so we're able to price some of those transactions right. That has always been the challenge for startup or smaller business when they're getting into these opportunities. Is sometimes the cost of this transaction sort of takes them out of contention for the business. So there's a huge focus that N is working towards to see if we can tie some of the corporates and governments into this transaction, so we can either price that at a sovereign rate or also at the commercial rate for larger mineral companies. Her time also has been spent around affordable housing. I think it's a challenge everywhere, or Indigenous home ownership. It's a little bit more immediate, I think, in WA with the current situation there. So we're working through some of that. There's a lot of work that's done with government, bringing government into the transactions to be able to form a tripartite model. So we hold government to account on some of those housing initiatives that we're working through. I think the other part that Fletch touched on before, we're seeing that grow a lot in WA in particular, is an opportunity for us to be able to fund some of these projects through blended finance model. I think historically for banks, when we talked about blended finance, that was just within the bank. So we'd look at different product mix to be able to fund these. We're expanding a little bit further than that at the moment. We're working with other partners, either equity providers or grant makers, to be able to bring them into the transactions that allows us to hopefully fund some of these opportunities that normally we wouldn't. So that has been the work for us in that region. And I'll hand back to Jaime to open up for some questions, or if he's got any questions for us.
Yeah, thanks, Noel, Charlene and Adam. That was some great insights, particularly the work that's happening around the country, the innovation that the NAB Banking Group is trying to, operate out there. With the opportunity now, we've still got 20 minutes to go, so we've got a bit of time for questions from the audience. So I think there's some mic operators there that can go around if anyone's got any questions. We've got a question down the front. And then we've got a question. We might take that question first, just to save you your legs, and then we'll come down the front here. Thank you.
Thank you. One of the problems that our people have found is, as individual people, so not as the corporations, but as individual people, not being able to use native title funds to, as their income when they're applying for loans, either as home loans or business loans. There's just, after the global financial crisis and the real crackdown around lending, because there's not policy written on it, they can't get lending, borrow from anybody, even like we've been getting native title funds for over a decade and have got lots of, evidence, and even with having a larger deposit, because the policy's not written, that's holding a lot of our people back. Is that something that the NAB Bank is looking at?
When you talk about native title funds, are you talking about royalties from native title?
Yes.
Yeah, from IWAs? Okay, and so royalties from native title IWAs have been landing in the bank account for over a decade. I'm sure you understand the question, so maybe you could throw to maybe Noel. Did you want to lead on that one?
Yeah, I will. There? Yeah, it hasn't. I think historically we were quite restricted, or nearly all banks were, around the types of revenue that can be used towards servicing of a mortgage. We kind of, I think, probably post-COVID, that's become a little bit of a challenge for us with people losing their jobs and what's happening in the market. It's in the mix of discussion. So we're walking through now And part of the work that I touched on that we're doing with ANU is some of those opportunities to be able to better understand. A lot of the times these policies are generated that are a little bit old and archaic, I think, from a period that we probably don't operate in anymore. So there's a real focus on us getting a policy shift in that. So we're looking at two phases for that. One, I think, is how we do that in-house so NAB can better service its customers or get mortgages based on that. It's not just native title payments. I think there's mine royalties and stuff like that comes through that historically we didn't use. But there's a definite desire for us to be able to understand that, to do that. So from a bank's point of view, but also from an external point of view. So the work that we're doing with ANU is just that. How do we build that into policy that every other bank can use that? And that's definitely underway. I think the work starts. We only signed off the agreement last week, so I'm hoping towards the end of the year we'll have the first pass at it. So watch this space, but I think it definitely needs to change.
Charlene or Adam, do you have anything to add to?
Yeah, I was just going to say that, so one challenge that our customers face is, again, banks are really hard to get into. So if you see going in your main street and you see a bank, it's a retail branch usually, and they might have some business bankers in there. And if you go in there and ask them for a home loan, they're going to probably try and line you up for a mortgage. And so that's some of the things that we're trying to unpick and work through. So that example would be, if you're up for it, would be something worth workshopping with. I'm not sure which state you're from, but if there's an agreement, an ILUA, and there's a dependable revenue stream, and if it can be demonstrated that revenue stream's sufficient to repay a loan, like at its core principles, there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to accept that. There are regulations for different products that we have that sort of block us out. But there are different ways we can structure the relationship. So sometimes we'll look at the customer as an individual consumer, and without having that holistic view of the relationship with the PBC or the native title body that they're part of, in effect, if that body is the one that's paying the loan back, that's who we should be partly having the conversation with when we're assessing those loans. But it's a challenge, because if you go into a retail branch or you call our customer line and ask for a mortgage, there's a standard checklist that's in line with our normal income sources we accept, and most of our loans are still mainly repaid by wages. So we've got blind spots on gig economy workers, self-employed people. Historically were a challenge for us to lend to, and I think this is another category of customer where they might have a job, they might have cultural responsibilities, and they also might have a dependable source of income from their PBC. But if we don't understand how that works and how the money's going to come through, it's quite likely that perhaps that person won't be able to secure a loan. So I thank you for raising that with us, and we'd love to have a conversation with you after if you're up for it as well.
Thanks, Fletch. As a career banker, I kind of tend to focus on the numbers and the policies, and I think one thing that can be said is that I'm really proud of the fact that there's finally an avenue for change. Through the banking industry, Australian banks hold a banking licence, and there's quite a lot of policy and procedure and parameters around that. So we have to be very diligent in our responsible lending practices as well, and a part of those still relate to quite archaic and very long-term parameters and risk appetite. And so we're in now a sector that's gaining momentum, and it's important that when we do something, we get it right the first time and we don't have to go back and regenerate the wheel again. So that's what we're trying to do. And having involvement and collaboration and round tables for that can be quite challenging. So we're trying to change the landscape, but sometimes it does take a little bit of time. I know that that's not particularly what people would want to hear, but I think that doing it right the first time might be the way to do it, rather than creating a change that has to go back and get reviewed. So hopefully because the discussions are taking a little bit longer than certainly we would like sometimes, it means that once we put something in place from a legislative or policy point of view, then other banks can actually use it as well. So it creates a quicker outcome across the board. I don't know if that will be the case, but that's certainly what we're trying to do. So Noel says sometimes, we're kind of building the plane while we're flying it. And that's not technically true, but we are kind of pioneering some of the ideas, and we're doing that with a lot of discussions and people that we're collaborating with, certainly from a First Nations point of view, but also as an industry. And so there's a lot of considerations that come into that. Thank you, though.
Yeah, thank you. Excellent question. I've got a couple of follow-up questions, and then we'll go to down the front here. Are there any, comparable sources of income or revenue that an individual might use, such as revenue from stocks, dividends from stocks and shares, etc., that could be kind of relatable to the example of getting royalties from native title agreements?
Sorry, can I just so are you talking with the trust bodies that are managing this money for the corporations and native title holders? Because, like, our trust, for example, they put together a big amount of evidence and writing supporting letters and everything that go with our members, but the response from the banking community has been across the board, because there's just not the policy, even though, we're providing, so if they were privately owned shares, not as a native title, we could use them, but because it's through native title and the policy's not written, even though the evidence is there, all the documentation, and it's coming from trust bodies that are overseeing it, so it's all, we still can't use it. So are you working with trust organisations to say, okay, well, what can you provide to the banking community? Like, how do we write the policy with what is available to the members to be able to provide through their trust?
In short, yes. We've engaged with AIATSIS to be able to help that. And I think to what Charlene was saying, just adding to that, we just want to put enough evidence in front of it that it's not we can't understand, as you said today. We will, to Jamie's point, we will use, if you have a share portfolio, we use the revenue out of that, and that's okay for some reason. And the policy is not written for payments coming through ILUAs or native title. So that's the bit that we're looking to shift. I think we talked about it. There's a clear conscience on the banks to be able to get that right, not just NAB. I think every bank has to get it right. That's definitely in the mix. I think it just, to Charlene's point, sometimes this policy change does take a little bit. It's a system that's been around for 220 odd years that we're trying to shift and the thinking in. But we definitely understand that to the way we deal with transactions, it's no different to a revenue, a secure source of revenue coming through a payment from a royalty payment or to a native title payment that is just probably looks, smells and feels just like a share payment coming from a share portfolio, sorry. So yes, definitely is. We are talking, but maybe hopefully after this, if we can grab some time and I'll get some details, and we'll then hopefully get that particular native title body directly and walk through this with you.
Thank you, Noel. Thank you. Great question, great follow-up. We'll go to down the front here. While you're making your way down the stairs, I've got another follow-up. Has there been any precedents where there's been situations where there's been new sources of revenue? You talked about the gig economy. Maybe there's some other examples where the banks have had to shift their thinking in the policy to be able to kind of recognise new sources of income in the kind of new modern age, or is this kind of some of this stuff more unprecedented?
I think on a individual basis, yes, we have.
Yep.
But it hasn't been. And that's a difficult part. I think whilst we're not quite there yet. We tend to deal with deal by deal basis. What that doesn't do is help the customers across the board. So if they walk into through one of these guys, we'll pick them up and we'll run with it, and we'll more than likely get it through. Because part of the role we do is help educate the bank internally on some of these payments and structures and how things work. What we haven't been too good at up till now is putting that into policy of some sort. So we certainly are working towards it, and I think that's when it starts to shift in this space, when we start to make wholesale changes. We are getting there slowly. The people that help us through this, if we're talking about NAB, that's 37,000 employees, and it's probably the same people that did the credit decisioning 20 years ago that are still doing it. So it's that bit that we have to shift. I don't think it's too different in any other banks in how that decision gets made.
Yeah, thanks, Noel. We'll take the question in the front.
Hi. Earlier we heard, I think there's 4 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander board members on the ASX 200. Mm-hmm. I'm just curious about getting an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander person on NAB's board. How would you guys, are you guys looking into that, and how would that kind of happen?
Good question. Who wants to take that one?
That is a great question. I think that's something we've been trying to get, because I think if we get that part right, then it influences in what we are trying to achieve on the ground level. We kind of have raised that. It's part of one of the initiatives that we've put in place in our current rep for the bank to be able to get that right. What we do have in the interim, we kind of baby steps at the moment. We've got an advisory committee that sits between the board and the bank that helps guides us through some of the projects that we do and any changes we're trying to create in this space. The chair or the co-chair for the board then reports into the board. What we haven't got is a direct placement in there. That's a desire for us hopefully in the next 3 years is the cycle of our rep, that we get that going. I think that's where a lot of the corporates are struggling at the moment. I think it's needed. We talked about intellectual properties, we talked about FIAP, and we talked about the importance of some of those things. An easy fix for that would be is to have a person with lived experience on the board, then we don't have to do that. So we certainly understand the importance of it. We've put that as part of our desire to have that, to help us do what we do a little bit better. And we just hope that every other corporate too. And I think it is a conversation that's been had a lot in this space. And I think I touched on before, it's not just we're getting asked questions here, it's our staff that are joining the bank asking the same question. And now the shareholders holding us to account. So definitely a thought. And I think that will be an amazing day if we can be the first bank to have an Indigenous person on our board that fixes a lot of our problems.
Send your resume to Noel Prakash at nabbank.com.au. Is that right?
No. I'll do the risk disclosure. So board appointments aren't for, we're part of management, so we work in the business.
I know, bro.
Yeah,
That's all right.
But it is a good point, because I think in the industry...
You don't have any influence over the board selections? Come on, Adam,
I wish. We do get exposure to the board.
Working a bit harder, brother.
So that there is small in terms of our colleagues, our Indigenous colleagues, the industry as a whole is trying to get more Indigenous people into banking and to stick around long enough. When you look at the people who are chairs of boards, our current chair, Phil Cronican, has worked at, I think, 3 of the major 4 banks. They're people that have fairly long careers, 40, 50 years, and we still don't quite have the tenure of our Indigenous colleagues at that level yet. And I'm really itchy for it to happen as soon as possible. I want to have a First Nations board member, because it's a light on the hill for our people to see that we can occupy those spaces. And it is an opportunity for us to reshape how we govern our organisations and infuse our culture into some of these businesses and institutions. But I think that like, how do we get there? How long does it take? It's a hard question. Board appointments are done through our shareholders. Our shareholders have elections to vote them on. And there's also the AICD, the Australian Institute of Company Directors. I think there's some work happening in terms of board diversity. I hope we have success there. But in terms of what we're able to do inside of the business, we're working really hard to make sure that we keep and retain and support the career growth of our bankers. So eventually we'll have I'd love to have an Aboriginal CEO, actually. That would be a great start. But having an Aboriginal chairperson or board member would be an important step for us as well. But it's frustrating. It takes time. I'm 15 years in. I think some of our longest serving colleagues are probably 20, 25 years. But we're also really deadly talented as well. So you kind of invest in these people and they get poached and go somewhere else. So I'm hopeful that those people will have fruitful, deeply experienced careers, and maybe in the next 10 to 15 years, that's the talent we're going to be coming after, saying, you know banking, maybe you know mining, maybe you know energy, maybe you know whatever the new environment that we're facing into is, you're a perfect board member for us to have, and they get invited onto our board. But yeah, I share your aspirations, I'd love it.
Sounds, Charlene, you've got the perfect resume to me. Career banker, First Nations woman, Queensland. Huh?
Regional.
Need to get behind you and get the shareholders to support you to be the next NAB board member.
I don't know about that, but I was actually just going to add.
Throwing it out there.
Yeah.
Can't hurt.
I think it's really important that when we do engage employees, that they're passionate about what they do, regardless of anything else. So the passion is definitely something that bring to the table, and of course, if we can have someone who's also deeply experienced and culturally aware, and you know, where that's a First Nations person, absolutely, that would be the first choice. At the moment, what we're trying to do and our goal is to achieve that. But right at the moment, you know, we select based on merit if there isn't someone else to take the chair. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Great response. We're going to, unfortunately, there's no. I've got 2 minutes 42. Okay. All right. We've got more questions. You want me to take more questions? It's 5 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon. I've got people buzzing me away and the whole types of things. I think critically important from the top down, it's important to have great leadership, board level, executive level critically, but also for the point before, from the bottom up in those branches where you go in and knocking on the door, talking to people about home loans, saying, hey, this is my situation. Just as critical, having those people on the ground understanding your situation. So from the spectrum of the leadership and also from the ground up, it's important to have First Nations perspectives in there, whether they are First Nations people, but understanding the space, and critically when you do introduce new policy, it's one thing having the policy sitting there, it's another thing having the right people to be able to implement and understand it, because it's a complex space to be able to do so, whether it be through home ownership and you bringing your revenue, I guess, documentation in there, or, you know, after small businesses as well. I'm going to take 2 more questions, and they need to be quick. Let's go.
Thanks so much for your presentation and time today. Hopefully I'm not going to keep you too long by asking this one. It's been great to hear what NAB is doing. I guess throughout the summit we've heard a lot about the opportunity for PBCs to participate in the clean energy transition, as well as the need for ownership and equity. I guess from a banking perspective, I'm wondering if you could elaborate on what that process might look like for PBCs that want to pursue and own clean energy business projects, especially where there might be a lack of access to capital. And I guess in short, do you have any guides or resources available, or are you looking into developing anything like that? So it is a bit of a long one.
Yeah, short one but long one at the same time. That's a big question, but can be answered in a short space of time.
Yes, I don't think there's anything that exists in the finance space. We were up at the Clean Energy Forum in Adelaide last week or 2 weeks ago. So there's some resources around there that we definitely want to steal off to be able to start. I think the short answer to that is we acknowledge that we've got to play a part in that. And for some of the larger projects, how do we fund it? We know
Yep.
from a corporate point of view, I think it fits in. For us, it's getting our head around who are the players in that space, and how at the end of it, from a shareholder's point of view, how does that loan get paid? So that's just from a debt point of view. What we're also doing very quickly is bringing in other partners into that. So I talked about before blended finance. Is there an opportunity for us to help build some equity into that by bringing in, either philanthropic support or if there's any grant makers that are doing it? So we acknowledge that and we've started to work with that. But if you've got any projects, please talk to us because we definitely want to put a couple on our books.
Access to the capital is a massive issue, not in the only clean energy space, but generally for PBCs and other organisations, land holding groups. They've done a great job of articulating the land holding space, land councils, etc. We know it's been an issue for a long time. We've had deep conversations about the fundability of native title and what's it actually worth in your hand, and how can you take that to the bank and say, hey, I've got this land tenure here, what's it worth? Can we borrow against it to actually, use that to create an economic prosperity for our people? These are big questions that I know the corporate sector's leaning into. State and federal governments also need to lean into it as well. And Noel spoke about blended finance. How do you vendor loans when the backing, the income's guaranteed? There's all these big questions that are yet to be answered, but that's an excellent question. We've got one more question up the back.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
Stephen from Mudford, Ngunnawal. We're hearing...
That's
It's all good. We're here. Yep.
Sorry, you can still hear me?
Yep.
Yep. We're hearing in our community that, and it's a little bit off topic, some banks are closing down in regional areas and people are finding it a bit of a struggle to be able to visit banks. ATMs are getting put in to replace the actual bank, and not everybody has the social, economic and aptitudes to be able to use ATMs. Some people need face-to-face. Disabled people need to be able to go in. Some people that aren't educated, they need to be able to go in. We're talking about our mobs and we're talking about the broader communities. So when you're doing your studies and looking at banks and writing policies, they've got to come up with better processes for people to be able to access their monies. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. 15-second answer. Was that a statement or you go?
No, it is. We're hearing this more. I think just like any other business, they put a commerce law on that, and they kind of go, if I'm not making money at the branch, we got to close it. There's a lot more studies done. We hearing that there's other banks that have put a freeze on that, where they're not closing any more branches, and I think that's something we have to get better at. Banks, we can't understand these branches are not just there for transactions. They also at times act as a community hub. So we definitely acknowledge that it needs to be re-looked at. There's some banks that are a little bit ahead than ours at the moment around closing branches and what the focus is. That's certainly a discussion that we're having internally very, very quickly to walk through if we catch up with some of the other brands, the red ones and the yellow ones that have put a freeze on closing branches. So we are on the pathway, but yeah, we'll get there. I know.
Noel's got to learn how to answer questions quicker. That's all right. But, we can coach you through that. And Charlene's going to get the last word.
Yeah, thank you. Steve, was it? Steve? Steve, I just wanted to very quickly add, I'm sorry to hear that in community that's happening, and it's certainly not something that's a preference. Often it's a commercial decision. What I was going to say was, though, if there's a branch that's closing in community or for any other measure, we've actually established an Indigenous customer service line. I know that it doesn't replace a branch and face-to-face, but what they're working to do is they take approximately, I'm just trying to think, I think it was about 500 calls a month, and our Indigenous customer service line is dedicated specifically to Indigenous clients. Predominantly, I think 40% of the calls come through from the Torres Strait and remote rural and regionally isolated community members. So as much as we may be taking that action face-to-face in community, we're also adding other elements on the back of that to help support customers. So if you'd like to know a little bit more about that, I'd be happy to talk to you.
Great, thank you. Thanks to everyone for waiting around, and we've got places to be. Thanks for the panel members. It's great insight to the internal operations of the bank. We're not often getting a chance to hear from the kind of banking sector, or often on the other end of the phone or on the teller. So it's great to make yourselves available and have the yarn with the mob, and you'll be around for a little bit to be able to ask some questions on the side. So thanks everyone. Enjoy your night. Those that are going to the tour of the G, enjoy yourselves. You're out in the town of Melbourne, enjoy yourselves as well. So thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you.